Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dr. Dennis Allen, Executive Director of the Greater Cleveland School Superintendent Association and a proud City Club member. I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, Professor Emerita and former Kellner Family Chair in Urban Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and the current President of the National Academy of Education, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. For the last few years, we've hosted several speakers at the City Club who have offered various perspectives on urban revitalization and fostering equity in neighborhoods. Today's speaker continues on that theme with a slightly different lens. Rather than focusing on housing, job creation and growth, technology and the new economy, or attracting millennials, Dr. Ladson-Billings will share her perspective on how public education is the key to revitalizing America's cities. Her address couldn't be more timely. Just last week, we hosted the annual State of the Schools address with Cleveland Metropolitan School District CEO Eric Gordon, where students, families, community organizations, and key stakeholders came together to hear about the continued progress of the region's largest public school district, a district whose improvement many believe is the key to future success of our city and the region. A native of Philadelphia, Dr. Ladson-Billings began her career as a teacher and administrator in Philadelphia public schools before completing an MA in education at the University of Washington and a Ph.D. in curriculum and teacher education at Stanford University. After stints at Santa Clara University and the Far West Educational Laboratory, she joined the faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she held the position of Kellner Family Chair in Urban Education and Professor of Curriculum Instruction, as well as Educational Policy Studies. Dr. Ladson-Billings is widely recognized as the founding expert in the field of culturally relevant pedagogy, which empowers students to maintain cultural integrity while succeeding academically. Much of her research examines the practices of teachers who are successful with struggling students. She is best known for her book, The Dream Keepers: Successful Teachers of African American Children, published in 1984 but still widely used in teacher education programs across the country. A distinguished scholar, she is the recipient of many awards, honorary degrees, and fellowships. Earlier this year, she was named the #4 Education Policy Scholar on Dr. Rick Hess's 2018 RSHU EduPolicy Public Influence Rankings, which identifies the university-based scholars in the U.S. who are doing the most to shape educational practice and policy. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings.
Thank you, Dennis. You are now hired as my new hype man. He's done this twice today. Thank you. And also thank you to the City Club, its members and friends who are here today. Title of my remarks are, but what about the children? Why revitalizing cities starts with our children and our youth. The Maasai tribes of Tanzania and Kenya has a typical greeting when they meet others. They utter the words, Kasirian Injera. That's translated, and how are the children? The response is, all of the children are well. This response actually means life is good. And I start these remarks with this greeting as a way to think about how we might consider redeveloping and revitalizing our cities based on the welfare of our children. I've spent many years living and working in cities, and the strategy of redevelopment and revitalization follows some familiar and predictable patterns. Most cities develop city plans that include courting corporate business interests, working with developers to remove substandard housing and buildings, and replacing them with higher priced units, what we generally refer to as gentrification. And the cities also work to secure big ticket attractions like sports stadiums, arenas, and the art centers. In Wisconsin, every resident of Brown County is taxed to pay for the renovation done to Lambeau Field. The taxes are not just paid by Green Bay Packer fans, of which I am not one. I should be a 49er fan because my husband played for them, but I am Eagles green through and through, the championship Philadelphia Eagles. But they're not, those taxes aren't paid by the Packer fans. They're not even paid for just by football fans. All residents of Brown County pay the tax. Similarly, all the residents of Milwaukee County pay the tax assessed for Miller Park, where the Brewers play. So the Miller Brewing Company doesn't pay the tax. The Brewers fans don't pay the tax. The baseball fans don't pay the tax. All of the residents of Milwaukee County pay that tax. Another way that cities work on improving themselves is through infrastructure improvement. Improved roadways, mass transit, parks, and shopping centers are examples. Cities often see themselves as improving by, quote, cleaning up. And this cleaning up is more than adding more street sweepers or refuse receptacles on city street corners. It includes removing people who are seen as undesirable through restrictive laws and those ordinances. Cities begin to enact loitering and anti-panhandling, group assembly, and curfew acts. This is exactly what happened in New York City. This idea was what spurred New York City's stop and frisk ordinances. The downtown area was rid of so-called unworthies, the homeless, the mentally ill, the addicted, and the poor in general. And they were removed to create a space for the up-and-coming hipsters, techies, and Gen X and Y, and millennials with disposable income. However, the one urban development, urban revitalization approach that has never been tried is to improve our cities by improving our schools and our education. For many of us, we treat schools like utilities. They're just there, like electricity, or gas, or water. We do not think of them as a place of leverage or a building block for urban revitalization. In 2007, I published an article in the North Carolina Law Review titled, "Can We at Least Have Plessy? The Struggle for Quality Education." And this article included a section I titled, "The Chronicle of the Sacrificed Black Children, Part 2." Now, the Part 2 referred to the fact that the late legal scholar, Derek Bell, had written the first such chronicle when he talked about the price that Black children and their families paid to participate in school desegregation efforts. My chronicle talked about the way city leaders bargain away the education of Black children, of Latino children, of immigrant children, as they provide TIFs for major corporations. They push poor people to the first-ring suburbs as they reclaim the central city housing to build luxury condos, and they limit access to public schooling by closing them without consideration for community concerns. The recent trend of school closing has been apparent in cities like Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia. The primary stated reason for the school closing is a drop in enrollment. On the face of it, this makes perfect sense. However, closing a school is not merely about shuttering a building. Communities and traditions grow up in and around schools. When I lived in California, the one high school that served a predominantly black neighborhood was closed. The closure was a result of white families refusing to send their children to that school as a part of the court-ordered school desegregation plan. Thus, the homecomings, the school spirit, and the class rivalries that were a part of that school all disappeared. I will also say, incidentally, is that when the children from that community were bused to the other schools, they had no way to participate in the co-curricular activities because they couldn't stay after. There was no bus to bring them home from baseball practice or football practice. So they just went to school and came back. Just because a school has a drop in enrollment doesn't mean it has to be closed. Many commercial buildings in cities are multi-use buildings. There is nothing that prevents a building from having a commercial or a social service enterprise on the first floor and a school on the second or third floor. Indeed, right here in Ohio, I have visited the Dayton Early College Academy High School that has some business offices on its first floor and the schools on the second floor. What keeps us from thinking creatively about how to use space? Typically, we use a state-mandated formula for how much space each student is allotted. We don't have a similar mandate or metric for colleges and universities. So, for example, the Ohio State University has an enrollment of 59,482 students at its Columbus campus. The university sits on 1,665 acres, and I can guarantee you, at any given hour of the day, there are classrooms that sit empty. We would not characterize Ohio State as under-enrolled. Similarly, my campus at Wisconsin enrolls 43,820 students on its 936 acres, and again, I can find empty classrooms at various times during the day, but no one would suggest that the University of Wisconsin is under-enrolled. More striking, my alma mater, Stanford University, enrolls 16,430 students on a 8,180-acre campus. This school is about a quarter of the size of Ohio State and a third of the size of Wisconsin, yet it is 5 times the physical size of Ohio State and 8.5 times the size of Wisconsin. But is Stanford under-enrolled? And more to the point, should any of these schools be closed because they're under-enrolled? If we can creatively use space for the most privileged and elite among us, why do we want to constrain what should be available to the least of these? So I've suggested that most cities follow a standard method to reform and revitalize, and now I want to consider a different approach to improving our cities. So instead of a top-down approach that gives most of the resources to the wealthiest, I want to propose a vision that helps reshape our cities from the bottom up. First, let me be clear on the benefits of education, not merely for the individual, but for the entire community. I want to talk about the real benefits of early childhood education and high-quality early care. We know, for example, that one of the groups with the highest rates of participation in the workforce is African American women. Their participation is at 59.2% versus 57% of the overall women's workforce. White women participate in the labor force at a rate of 56.9%, and Latinas participate in a rate of 56%. The need to work means that African American women require child care, and that child care for young children occurs really along a continuum. The majority of African American working mothers make use of family daycare for their young children. And while we know these home and family care providers are sincere, they're doing the best that they can, They rarely measure up to the quality care offered by providers with early childhood education credentials and the National Association of Education of Young Children standards. Our hodgepodge of child care options is in stark contrast to what I observed in Sweden, where all working parents are entitled to high-quality child care and preschool. And stay-at-home parents can access that quality child care on a space-available basis. However, when U.S. parents can access high-quality early childhood care and education, Nobel laureate economist James Heckman has calculated that there is a 13% return on investment. According to Heckman, high-quality early childhood care and education can prevent this achievement gap we keep talking about. It can improve health outcomes, it can boost lifetime earnings, and improve education, economic productivity, and reduce crime. High-quality child care also helps parents boost their earnings. Heckman's work is devoted to the development of a scientific base for economic policy evaluation, and his career has included developing models to study underemployment, unemployment, wage growth, and skill formation. Heckman's report, The Productivity Argument for Investing in Young Children, describes how individual productivity can be fostered by investments in young children, particularly children in poverty and other adverse circumstances. According to Art Rolnick and Rob Grunwald of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank, investment in early childhood education in Minnesota yields a return that far exceeds the return on most public projects that are considered economic development. The report considered several studies of model programs, and when considering the Perry preschool program, they found a return on investment of 16%, with 80% of the benefits going to the general public. The data about model programs, such as the Perry School, yielding more than $8 for every $1 invested, is one way of describing the investment. Rolnick and Grunwald's use of the rate of return clearly shows the benefits of investment compared to other types of investment. So what might the outcomes look like for children who travel different paths in early childhood? And to illustrate the impact of quality early childhood education, I'd like to share the story of two children that I will call Jerome and Jamal. And the stories are really composites of the data that we look at in terms of the trajectory of children based on their early childhood experience. So Jerome and Jamal are two black boys growing up in urban America. So we're going to start with Jerome's story. Jerome's story is a familiar one. Grew up in a big city with a high crime rate, high unemployment, high levels of substance abuse, and high rates of school dropout. His mother received a high school diploma and recognized the value of school as a way to improve her son's life. Jerome's dad, Jerome Sr., stopped participating in his life when he was about 3 years old. Jerome Sr. was unable to earn enough money to adequately provide for his wife, daughter, and baby boy. And after a string of dead-end jobs in fast food establishments and car washes, he decided to earn a little extra cash by selling drugs. In his mind, it was just a temporary hustle. And as soon as he accumulated enough money to get his family on their feet, he would stop. His choice became a constant source of tension between he and his wife. And one evening, the police stopped him because of a busted taillight on his barely functioning car. During the stop, the officer confiscated some marijuana and cocaine from his car. And Jerome Sr., without enough money to hire a lawyer, pleaded guilty on the advice of his public defender and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. With Jerome Sr. gone, little Jerome's mother needed to pick up more hours at her job as a nursing assistant. She also needed someone to watch the baby while she was working. Her older neighbor, Miss Annie, who was 59 years old and living off of her disability income, volunteered to do it. The $40 a week would help her pay a few bills, and besides, she liked this happy, playful little boy. Each day, little Jerome would stay with Miss Annie. She fixed him a good breakfast and lunch. She kept him clean, and once in a while she read to him. But mostly the two of them watched daytime TV. When little Jerome got tired of sitting, Miss Annie had some toys he could play with. He built things with blocks or played with toy trucks. And little Jerome liked Miss Annie. She was like his second grandmother. He spent 3 years with her. When it was time to attend regular school, Miss Annie walked Jerome to kindergarten at the neighborhood school and picked him up at the end of each school day. Jerome liked school too. They had lots of toys in kindergarten, but there were a lot of other children he had to share them with. The other children seemed like they knew things that Jerome didn't. His classmates could recite the alphabet. They could write their names. They knew all of the colors and the names for different shapes. This made Jerome feel stupid. He didn't like that. As the year progressed, Jerome was starting to learn some of the things his classmates already knew, but now they were going on to new things. Some of the other children could read. Often Jerome retreated to the block corner because he knew how to build things with blocks. Over the course of his elementary career, Jerome seemed to be sliding further and further behind. To hide his difficulties with reading, Jerome sometimes caused a ruckus in the classroom and was sent to the principal's office. By 5th grade, the playful, happy little boy that Miss Annie used to watch had become a sullen, angry boy that adults around him, especially white adults, seemed to fear. As he made his way into middle school, things got progressively worse. Jerome was taking remedial classes in reading and mathematics. His only friends were other black boys who were experiencing some similar academic difficulties. He and his friends regularly got into trouble. They were fighting and mouthing off to teachers. Detentions and suspensions from schools began to mount. By high school, Jerome had grown into a handsome yet alienated teenager. He hated school, and he and his friends often cut classes to hang out and get high. From time to time, they stole things from local schools and had negative encounters with police. To earn money, Jerome started selling marijuana. Of course, he was also smoking it himself. In an eerily similar scenario, he was riding in a friend's car that the police stopped. Because he was holding drugs, he ended up in the same prison where his dad was serving time. Placing both Jeromes in prison cost the state $70,000 a year. Neither was adding to the economic well-being of the state. His mother's low-wage job did not provide her with adequate health insurance, and she enrolled in the state's Medicaid expansion, costing the state another $6,500 a year. Her low salary also made her eligible for the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, that most of us know as food stamps. And those benefits represented another $4,500 a year that taxpayers contribute to keep this family from starving. Jerome's family received a little more than $80,000 from the taxpayers to exist in a lifestyle that none of us would want to emulate. How could it have been different? Well, let's listen to Jamal's story. Jamal's story is not so common. He too grew up in Jerome Jr.'s neighborhood. His mother did not finish high school when she got pregnant with her first child. Jerome was her second child, and she and his father worked to build a life together. Unfortunately, constant layoffs at his dad's factory meant the family income was never stable, and the strain of trying to raise a family on little money made him feel like he was less than a provider. Without much fanfare, he left his family and moved in with his sister and her family. Jamal's mother got a job as an instructional aide at an elementary school a few neighborhoods away. As she was contemplating what to do about childcare for Jamal, one of her coworkers explained that the school where they worked had an early childhood program affiliated with it. She could drop off Jamal each morning as she was coming to work and pick him up at the end of the day. And throughout the day, when she had a break, she could look in on Jamal, see how he was doing. Because of her income, Jamal's mother qualified for a reduced fee to enroll him in that early learning center. Jamal loved going to school. He was learning to play with other children as he learned his alphabet, how to count, the names of shapes and colors. At least 3 times a month, his school took a field trip. Sometimes it was a big trip, like to a petting zoo or to the airport. Other times they just took a walk to the nearby fire station or even the supermarket. And his teachers read stories all the time. He heard about dinosaurs and pandas and children who lived in other countries. By the time Jamal had finished 3 years at the Early Learning Center, he was excited and curious and confident. He knew he was going to be an archaeologist and find more dinosaur bones when he grew up. In kindergarten, Jamal continued to grow. His vocabulary was increasing, and he was starting to recognize words. One of his favorite things to do was to write stories about dinosaurs. By the end of kindergarten, Jamal was reading books at the 2nd grade level. Grades 1 through 5 were a real pleasure for Jamal. His teachers often commented on his eagerness to learn and pointed out that he was a leader in their classes. His transition to middle school was a smooth one, and he continued to excel in the core subjects as well as music. He pleaded with his mother to let him join the band, and it was there that he took up percussion and played the drums. In high school, Jamal continued playing the drums and developed a passion for wrestling. He had a full course load of academic subjects. He was learning Spanish, was a member of the band's drum line, and was wrestling on the school's top-ranked wrestling team. With the encouragement of his English teacher, he also joined the spoken word club. One of the club's performances took place on the campus of a university about 75 miles away from his home. He had no idea that college could be such an amazing place. When one of the college admissions officers told him about their award-winning band, he asked how he could learn more about attending school there. With the help of his high school counselor, Jamal took the ACT, applied to that school and a few others that had strong programs in anthropology and good bands. In the spring of his senior year, Jamal learned that he'd earned admission to the campus that he had visited, as well as one of his other choices. The other school offered him a more generous scholarship, and he decided to commit to that school. Years later, Jamal would finish his degree and take a job as a systems analyst for his home city. It wasn't exactly archaeology, but his work was about digging into complex systems to determine what went wrong. He earned $72,000 a year right out of college and learned that with more education, he might make over $100,000 a year. Jamal lived a life where he could help his mother and other family members. He married a young woman he met at college and started a family. A few years into their marriage, they were able to purchase their first home. Jamal was a contributor to his community and the local and state economy. He was able to volunteer at the local Boys and Girls Club and start a drumline program in the community that he grew up in. What made his life so different from little Jerome, who grew up a few blocks away? The difference between Jerome and Jamal was their experience in early childhood education. The investment in quality early learning meant that Jamal could begin school already prepared to benefit from what school had to offer. His ability to avoid the pitfalls of urban life, be it substance abuse, violence, or crime, made him able to participate in the society as a contributor, not as a dependent. Jamal is not a better person than Jerome. Indeed, they could very well have been the same person with identical fates. If we want to develop healthy, thriving cities, we need to do it with healthy, thriving people. And we need to create those healthy, thriving people by supporting them as children. We cannot incarcerate our way out of the problems that we face in cities. We cannot moralize and indict families for choices that they may have made that run contrary to what we believe represents good parenting and healthy lifestyles. We cannot remediate our way out of problems in our schools. We need to make our investments up front. We need prenatal care that ensures our children arrive on this planet in good health. We need living wages that allow families, regardless of their education levels, to live with some level of dignity. And we need access to quality education, early childhood education for the neediest among us. And when someone asked us, Kasirian Injera, and how are the children, we need to be able to respond, all of the children are well. Thank you.
I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club, and today we're listening to a forum with Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, Professor Emerita and former Kellner Family Chair in Urban Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the current President of the National Academy of Education. We're about to begin our audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you joining us via our live stream. If you'd like to tweet a question, you can tweet it at the City Club, and our team will work it into the program. Holding our microphones today are Membership and Customer Experience Manager Corey Isler and Content Coordinator Bliss Davis. May we have our first question, please?
Hi. Love the emphasis on early childhood education, which I think is really important. I wonder if you have any comments on earlier childhood education, parent education, and education of children from birth to 3.
So if you actually look at that Heckman curve, it really does start very, very early. The model programs are those programs that do begin with parent education. I work with a program that we now have in Madison called One City Schools, which is very early education. And one of the things that we are realizing that transitions are hard, but they're not just hard for parents of small children, they're hard for all of us. I always, when they talk about how hard it is for some parents to let their kids go in these early childhood settings, I said, listen, come on my campus in September and watch these people crying and snotting over these 18-year-olds. I'm like, really? Didn't you work all year, all your life to make this happen? Now you crying and going on? Let him go in and get in the dorm. He'll be fine. So all of us struggle with transition. And I think there's a point in which we have to help parents negotiate the transitions, mostly by maintaining the connection between the home and the school. I think that's the hard part, is that parents feel like they're sending their kids off into this pit somewhere and they don't know what's going to happen. But if we can maintain that connection. But your question actually means we need to be thinking about our relationship with the health services folks, the pediatricians, right? The obstetricians. Those, if you're going to start that connection at sort of prenatal, it won't be educators in schools who will do that. It will be people who start to see mothers from the very beginning. So I think you're absolutely right that we do need to be thinking from the very beginning.
Hi, it's nice to hear you again.
Thank you.
I was telling the people at the table you're good enough to hear twice. I have a question that I don't know if you'll be able to answer, but when we talk about schools closing and what's happening in our communities, these kinds of things happen to the least of these. Mm-hmm. And these are the people who are so busy, they're trying to survive. So they don't have time to organize and show the outrage and so forth. And a lot of times they don't recognize the power they have in voting, which is on National Voter Registration Day. Mm-hmm. I had to mention how voting can really change things. Right. So my question is, what do we do to get the least of these to recognize the power that they have in being able to change things? I know that's a really
It's a big question, but it does speak to a concern that I've had for the last 15 years. I kind of raised this alarm about what I call the destruction of public education, and people are like, oh, Gloria, you're overreacting. No, really. But you have to have a particular belief about public education to be invested in it, I would say, in the way I am. I believe that democracy demands public education. It is the one place where people, no matter where they are in the society, can come and understand what it is to be a citizen, what it is to be an American, what it is to participate. But what's being offered to some of these families who maybe not into the political process in the way that you described, they're being offered something outside of the public system. You know, get a voucher and go to private school. Do choice, make a charter. I mean, the sense that the public school's not that important is one that worries me. It is what I do lose sleep over, because I just don't understand how we can maintain democracy without it. And so that's the bigger question that I think we have to have people understand, that it's not, while your child is very important, it really is about our community, it is about our city, it's about our state, it's about our nation. And no advanced society has ever survive without providing education for all of its citizens. And so, again, it's a tough call, because it's hard for me to look a mother in the face and say, send your kid to this really terrible school down the street, when she's got a voucher in her hand and says, oh, I can go to St. Pius over here, right? It's a tough call. And it's why I think those of us who do understand the power of the political process, have to get engaged and be talking to folks. And there are places where we meet them across community lines, whether it's churches, whether it's civic and social groups. We do have a way to reach people. So.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your work. I've been reading your research as part of my doctoral studies, and I really appreciate your research. My question speaks to policy, and how do we educate across the board? You mentioned healthcare. You mentioned some other social areas. How do we help everyone across the board understand the upfront investment for the later impact, but coming together across the board?
So in some ways it gets back to her question. 4-year-olds don't vote. So they're not really constituents in the minds of elected officials. That's unfortunate, particularly when we have a system in which the name of the game is not to necessarily enact policy and change laws. The name of the game is get reelected. So if that's your only motivation, that you stay in office, you don't necessarily listen to spending money on 3- and 4-year-olds. So I think that's the hard sell. That's why we do have to work with these parents to say you shouldn't be voting for people who are not invested in your children, who don't care what happens to your children. And I don't know if we've done such a great job of really selling early education. We often start top down. We look at trying to reorganize and restructure high schools. We might get to middle schools and at some point elementary schools, but early childhood is often just not even on the agenda. I think it's Robert Reich, the former Secretary of Labor and economist, who says, all of our issues are important, but it's which issues stay on the table that get attended to. So it's not that this is an important issue, it's just often not on the table.
Dr. Ladson-Billings, thank you so much for your message and the way you present it.
Thank you.
It's very impactful. I have a bias. I think teachers have a special pathway to heaven. And I've been working for 40 years to improve the lives of children that I have come into contact with in my educational work. And we had a movement in businesses, particularly to have daycare centers in the buildings. And it used to be on the table in the 70s and in the 80s. What happened?
So I think, I know that you're from the San Francisco Bay Area, so you probably know that company. Is it Syntec? It's in Palo Alto. They were often rated as one of the best places to work, primarily because they had high-quality child care on site. But if it cost you $1 million to buy a house, and you're a young up-and-coming professional, you're probably not going to have any children. San Francisco is literally being described as a childless city because people who have children can't afford to live there. Child care costs are as high as college tuition, and in some cases higher. So people are being discouraged from raising families because of just the economic realities. So if the high-end people don't have children, then their investment in early childhood is like, this doesn't affect me. This doesn't. So it's not something that I think we can leave to individual families. I think systemically, I think schools, I mean, many of our schools, I'm not sure about Ohio, I know in Wisconsin we have a big move to PK4, right? So that instead of waiting for kindergarten, we're now bringing kids in at the 4 years old. But as was said over here, we often need to start before then, in the prenatal stages, you know, making sure that these are healthy children that come into our lives, but also that we help these parents understand here are some of the things you can be doing to ensure that your child gets a great start.
We're going to take a Twitter question
Okay.
next. Your argument is essentially an economic one. Invest a little now or pay a lot more later. Who is doing this well in the U.S.? Does the Kalamazoo Promise show us a path? And what about the Say Yes program our community is considering?
Okay. I love the way the question was phrased because it reminds me of the old Fram oil filter commercials. You guys remember that commercial where the guy would say, you can pay us now, you know, with the clean oil filter, or you can pay us later, and the engine is all apart, right? And that's what we're doing. We're paying later. So yes, it is an economic argument, and that's the argument that often resonates with the people with the money, a money argument. So typically what happens is you see these small-scale projects. I don't know Kalamazoo, but clearly what Jeffrey Canada was doing in New York with the Harlem Children's Zone with those 40 blocks. But I've not seen anywhere in the U.S. where we have done it as a kind of full-scale systemic choice, which is why I referenced the Swedish example. I spent some time in Japan. They're now doing, in China, where they're now doing what's called Anji Play. And this program I'm working with in Madison is doing it too. The idea that you bring kids in and you really kind of take advantage of their creativity. So they don't actually have built playgrounds. They have these different pieces, and the kids make the playground every day. Every day they have these parts, you know, they roll back the tarp, they pull out the parts that they want. They like, today this is a train, and another kid will say, well, yesterday it was a truck. Well, it's a train today, right? That the kids' imagination is what's spurring their play, and I think the philosophy of most early childhood educators is that children's play is children's work, that we again let them play so that their minds will expand. They don't have that opportunity in urban communities where it's too dangerous to just go play. So they spend a lot of screen time, whether it's TVs, iPads, phones, or Xboxes, whatever that is, but very little time to sort of, as the cognitivists tell us, to build those dendrites and grow those brains, because they don't have other kinds of opportunities to sort of exercise their minds. I think small-scale programs are often good. The problem is it's really hard to scale up, and the scale up is really linked to our policymakers and their commitment to all of our kids.
Hello.
Hi.
I guess I'm going to piggyback off of that question, and in particular, I know you've probably pondered this and you've been thinking about how you could possibly implement something like this on a larger scale. If you had to frame your thoughts as to how you might impact the structures systemically, what would be your thoughts surrounding that?
So 30 years ago, when I began investigating successful teachers of African American children, I went to a school in Newark, New Jersey, because the whole school was like off the charts in terms of performance. All their kids were performing better than a year above grade level. They say the key to their success was the early childhood program that they institute. The school is open from 6 a.m. to midnight. It's a full-service school. When I asked why your school's open so late, they said because a lot of our parents work a late shift. So in the evenings, they had maybe 20 kids, not a lot of kids, but they had kids there that got their homework done, that did recreation, and they fed them and put them to bed. And when they showed me the difference between a kid who had gone to kindergarten straight from home daycare versus one who had come through their early learning program, it was like night and day. Both kids really bright, but the one who had gone through their program could read, he could count, he had started the violin. I mean, it was stunning. When I talked with the principal about how did you make all this happen, he said, I knocked on doors for 4 straight years. And the community finally figured out I wasn't going to stop coming. So, but his approach to adults and their relationship with children is that every adult in this building has something to give children. I'm not concerned with credentials. The state is concerned with whether you are certified to be a second grade teacher. I want to know that you have some moral character and that you have some interest that you can share with kids. So they started a co-curricular program. Everybody in the school, the janitor had been a Navy cook, so he had a cooking class. The crossing guard loved to bowl. She had a bowling class. The secretary was a drummer. She had a drumming class. So the kids were always surrounded by caring adults who gave what they had to give. And I think we lose sight of that because we're so concerned about checking all the boxes. Do you have all certified people in this area, that area? Do you have a secretary? Do you have a bus driver? We've got to be able to give more of ourselves to kids. A lot of times the people will tell me, well, the reason the kids aren't doing well is because they're from a single-parent household. That's not it. Because it is near impossible for 2 people to raise children in this society. The kids who are the most successful are surrounded by caring adults. They leave school and they go to soccer, and they got a soccer coach. On the next day, they go to art class. Over here, they go to dance. They have, I tell my own students this all the time, 13-year-olds can only make 13-year-old decisions, okay? That frontal lobe ain't complete. In fact, it doesn't get complete until they're like 27, which means the people I deal with don't have a fully functioning frontal lobe. And if you want to test that, come to Madison in the middle of the winter. Come in February on Friday, Saturday night, and watch these people stand outside of a bar in freezing temperatures to get beer. That's not a fully developed frontal lobe. People my age go to 7-Eleven, Quick Trip, wherever, buy the beer, go home, Netflix, and chill, okay? So we know that our kids don't have enough kids around them. When the only people who are around them are their age, they make those kinds of decisions, and they're usually stupid decisions, but that's what they're capable of doing. So I think what we're talking about is mobilizing the adult power. But someone else made a comment about how intensely it is that people are working. Most of us are so tired because of the intensification of our own labor that we have almost nothing to give to the community. So it's a very complex issue, and schools, I believe, can be much more full service. We can be bringing more stuff in schools, whether they be health clinics, whether they be recreation services, whether they be job placement. I mean, there's all kinds of, because the schools can be and should be the center of a community.
We have another question from Twitter.
Okay.
Even when we get kids into pre-K, barriers exist between the teachers in the room and the kids like Jerome and Jamal. How can we prepare teachers to form strong relationships with students that do not share the same race and socioeconomic systems as their teachers? Can relationships be taught?
Yes, that's a short answer. We can learn how to get along with people and learn to know them outside of their own comfort zone. But I would say that part of the problem falls back on the places that I work, where we actually prepare them. To have teacher education programs understand that there needs to be a deep investment in communities, not just a school, not just a classroom, but what's happening in that community. The teachers that I describe in my study were people who found ways to insert themselves into the community. They went to Little League games. They went to the Pop Warner games. They went to the ballet recitals so that they became fixtures in the community. My favorite quote comes from this woman called Miss Winston, who incidentally passed away last year. Miss Winston had been teaching for 40 years when she was a part of my study. And she had taken these youngsters, and she was white. She'd taken some girls to her house to spend the weekend, because she did that, right? And the girls are looking up at family pictures on the wall. And I'll never forget, these are all African-American girls, and they looked at the pictures and they went, Miss Winston, what you doing with all these white people up here? And then they were like, oh, right, you white. You know, that something had happened in the relationship, that the kids didn't think of her as that white teacher. They thought of her as Miss Winston, who's always there for us, who does X, Y, and Z. So part of it is us in teacher education making sure that our students have real and authentic relationships in communities, and people beginning to understand the relationship between the kids' success and the quality of life they can lead. That part, I think, is broken. I think that we now think, well, we can go live behind a gated community. I don't have to be around this. But you are paying more and more of your tax dollars to fix what could have been a good situation if we actually engage with these kids and their families.
We have another question from Twitter. The economic argument is strong and sound. It resonates deeply in a very adult-centered culture. What shifts need to happen, culturally speaking, to further the cause for high-quality early childhood education and mental health care?
Well, I guess it's George Lakoff that talks about the metaphors that we live by. And the one thing you say to Americans to get them all jazzed up is, I'm gonna lower your taxes. Most of us spend all April figuring out how to, nope, I ain't paying that, nope, let me cut this out. We hire people so that we don't have to pay it. This is actually contrary to the good society. Many good societies figure out, what do we need to pay to have excellent services? We have been sold what I think of as a lie, that the public interest is just the aggregation of all of our private interests. That's not the case. Sometimes you have to give up something. You know, my classic example is I would like my trash collected on Monday, because I make a mess in my house over the weekend. You know, so one time I really cooked for them people, right? And I got all kinds of stuff, and I want it out of my house by Monday. But the way the city is planned, they don't come on Monday. They come on Tuesday. I'm willing to sacrifice that you come on a day other than what I want, because for the good of the city, that makes sense. We tend not to think that. We often think about what's in it for me. And until we can get to a place where we understand, you know, it doesn't help me if you're sick. You know, if you're contagious, how's that helping me? I need you to have health care so that you can go and get taken care of so I don't get sick. But we often don't think that way. So I don't know how we get people to invest more in the public interest. There has been, over this last generation, what I would call an evacuation of the public sphere, that we don't want to engage in the public. We think that the best things in life are private, and I would argue that's not the case. That in a democratic society, we have to be publicly invested.
Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a forum with Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, Professor Emerita and former Kellner Family Chair in Urban Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's also the current president of the National Academy of Education. Our forum today is part of our Education Innovation Series sponsored by the Nordson Corporation. We're delighted to have Monica Davis from Nordson with us today. We're very grateful for your support of City Club education programming. Our forum today is also presented in partnership with Cleveland State University's Center for Educational Leadership and the Greater Cleveland Schools Superintendent Association. We thank you both for your continued partnership. Our community partner for today's forum is Minds Matter Ohio, and our hospitality partner is the Metropolitan at the 9 Hotel. We appreciate your partnership in our forum today. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by Breakthrough Charter Schools and Cleveland Clinic. Also, we welcome students from High Tech Academy and MC Squared STEM High School. Student participation in City Club forums is provided by many foundations, including the William M. Weiss Foundation. We thank all of you for being here today. That brings us to the end of our forum. Thank you, Dr. Ladson-Billings. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland Incorporated.